had the most bizarre experience because I received a beautiful handwritten letter from Sayyid Muhammad Shihab Thangal, read it, and within minutes the news arrived that he had passed away in Kerala. It gave me a very, very deep shock and a sense of intimate connections with an individual I had not met. I had come to Delhi as an MP and a minister. He had written to me on some issues, requesting me to come and meet him, which I was looking forward to do. I read that letter, and literally within 5 or 10 minutes of reading that letter, in his own handwriting, the news came that he had passed away. So, for me, his life made a personal impact at the moment of his leaving it, and I must say that I took the trouble to find out a little more about this gentleman who had literally just walked in and out of my life within the span of a few minutes. And of course, what I learned, many of you already know, but I think it's worth placing it on the record here, that he was, of course, a giant of Kerala and of Indian politics as well, without ever actually contesting an election himself. His family traces their lineage back to the Prophet Muhammad. He is seen as a 33rd generation descendant of the Prophet himself. And after his initial religious studies in Kerala, he actually did his higher education in Egypt, got his degree at the famous Al-Azhar University, and a doctorate in Arabic literature. And he could have easily stayed on in the Arab world. I was told many offers were made to him, but he decided to come back and serve his own people. And when his father, the legendary Shihab Thangal, who was talked about by Sheikh Anthony, passed away in 1975, he took over leadership of the Indian Union Muslim League and led it for an astonishing 34 years, from 1975 till he passed away in 2009. As we've heard, the extraordinary thing about him was his uncompromising secularism, his absolute determination to promote the integrated life of all communities in our country, the decision that he made at every stage to choose cooperation and coexistence above mere community interest. He had this vision that the best way to protect his own community was by immersing it in the social and political and economic life of other communities. And there are 3 wonderful stories, I think, which are worth recounting. One has already been mentioned twice, I won't repeat it in detail, and that was his extraordinary stance when tempers were inflamed, understandably inflamed, around the country after the demolition of the Babri Masjid in 1992, and a number of hotheads in the Muslim community in Kerala as well as elsewhere in the country, as you know, stood up demanding that there should be some sort of retaliation. He was absolutely firm in ordering that there would be no retaliation. He was determined that followers of his faith would show their commitment to communal harmony, and he particularly took a very interesting step. He sent members of the League, many of his followers, directly to those communities where temples, Hindu temples, were located in Muslim majority areas. And he said, I want you to ensure that none of these temples is harmed. It was an extraordinary gesture. And thanks to that action, he actually was able to preserve an extraordinary oasis of communal harmony. I think it's safe to say that everywhere else in India, in the aftermath of that tragic demolition, there was a great deal of communal unrest and a lot of violence, as well as very inflamed sentiments. But not in Kerala. When you realize, for example, that he took the trouble to say that he would ensure, and he actually insisted that people from his followers go and do this, ensure the safety of pilgrims traveling through the area on their way to and from Shabarimala at that time, the peak of the pilgrimage season. That was the kind of thoughtfulness that he applied. A second example, I was in a place called Angaripuram just a few months ago in Malappuram district. It is a small, particularly lovely little town with an extraordinarily beautiful temple. And I heard an amazing story there. At that temple, apparently one night, there was a mysterious fire that damaged irreparably the door, the very precious ancient carved door of that temple. And immediately some mischief makers started spreading the rumor in the Hindu community that the door had been damaged by Muslim vandals. When Honakat Syed Muhammad Ali Shihab Thangal heard about this, he didn't wait to find out the truth, who might have done it, who might not have done it. He immediately said, I don't care who has done the wrong. The people who worship at this temple are my neighbors and my brothers. I will insist that I will take on the responsibility and the expense of replacing this door. This is not a small door. We're talking about a door that is 8 meters by 2 meters, thick wood, brass carvings on an extraordinary door. When I went to the temple, I noticed the door. And then somebody told me you should hear the story about this door. The story was indeed the story of this extraordinary figure who had prevented a crisis when it might have actually completely inflamed opinion in that area. The third story that is I discovered from an English language magazine was about the story of the RSS leading coconut tree. Some of you may have heard this story. It's an anecdote.
Is this better? I'm just seeing that. I felt I had to shout earlier. Anyway, I hope you heard the first two stories because there's no time to repeat them. But the third story is about what was jokingly called in an English language magazine, the RSS leading coconut tree. It turns out that a coconut tree belonging to a Hindu household it grew in such a way that it bent over the roof of a masjid. And being a good Kerala masjid, the masjid had roofs made of clay tiles. And the coconuts falling from this leaning coconut tree kept falling on the masjid and breaking the tiles. Now this happened once, twice, third time. The more it happened, the damage to the roof was bad enough, but the damage to communal relations was worse, because inevitably a great deal of tension arose. A number of people who were worshipping at the masjid demanded that the tree should be cut down. The family was unwilling to cut down the tree. In the midst of this crisis of the leanings of the coconut tree, the story goes that both parties, that is the masjid committee and the Hindu family, said we will go for mediation to the one man who is going to give a fair judgment, and that is going to Syed Muhammad Ali Shihab Thangal. So Thangal heard the story from both sides. Then from his own pocket he took out some money. He gave it to the president of the mosque committee, and he said, the roof of the masjid has to be demolished, replace the clay roof tiles with concrete, and here is the money. Now, as you know, in the community there is this widespread belief that if the first donation to any project comes from the Thangal himself, then the success of the project is assured, because his blessings will follow with his donation until the successful completion. So the story is that the two parties returned to their homes in the village, and when the young representative of the family who had been sent to have this negotiation told his old mother what had happened, she was completely distraught. She said, how can you do this? A mosque is going to be damaged because of us. You have brought a curse upon the family. And she rushed in her car to see the Thangal that very night to apologize for her family's attitude and to say they would cut the tree. The Thangal, of course, received her with a great deal of grace, and in his famously soft manner, he said, do not cut the tree. The coconut tree is the elixir of life. It should be protected at any cost. What is a roof? The tree is more important. And he completely diffused what might have become a crisis. I'll tell you these three stories because in many ways We can use all sorts of praise and read a lot of obituaries to honor a great man. But sometimes these three stories, these three incidents, reveal perhaps more about him, his attitude, and his commitment to social harmony than anything else can do. And I wanted to recall this because given his background, his own conduct, his beliefs, what would Shihab Thangal have thought about the state of the country today? The rise of communal violence we have been witnessing, particularly in the last 4 years, the mounting authoritarianism, the chauvinism we are seeing, promoted by people who, unlike our founding fathers and unlike Shihab Thangal, see nationhood as being determined by religion. The topic we've been given today is redefining nationalism in today's India. And we've heard from our president today, from Sadiq Ali ji, a couple of definitions of nationalism. He has looked at it in a very positive light. I looked up some other definitions, and you know, George Orwell, the famous British writer and thinker, he had a slightly more negative. We drew a distinction in his famous essay in 1945 called Lok Sabha Nationalism, written at the end of the Second World War. He drew an important distinction between patriotism and nationalism. Patriotism, he said, is devotion to a particular place and a particular way of life, which you believe to be the best in the world because you were born there, it's your country, you care for it, but you have no wish to force it on other people. You love your country, you fully accept that somebody else loves their country. That is patriotism, and Orwell thought that was fine. It celebrates, after all, the way a nation is in all its forms. But then nationalism, if you look at what Shihab Thangal said, he said it's ultimate possessiveness about one's motherland in a dignified and honorable way. And one could argue that's what it should be. But Orwell saw it slightly differently. He said that nationalism assumes that human beings can be labeled like insects, that blocks and the millions can be labeled one country, one nation or the other, good or bad, and that you are obliged to identify yourself with a national unit, placing it beyond good and evil, and recognizing no other duty than that of advancing its interests. In other words, he saw patriotism as an essentially defensive emotion, and nationalism as an aggressive attitude. And to Orwell, nationalism was always associated with a desire for power. I quote Orwell, "The abiding purpose of every nationalist is to secure more power and more prestige, not for himself, but for the nation or other unit in which he has chosen to stake his own individuality." So he saw nationalism as an alternative to individualism, and he saw nationalism for that reason in a bad light. Now, I would disagree with him a little bit. I'm closer to what Sadiq Ali Shihab Thangal said a few minutes ago from this stage. Because ultimately, nationalism doesn't have to be what Orwell defined. Nationalism can be an extension of the patriotism he defined, applied to the nation to which you belong and to which you give your allegiance. After all, our freedom fighters, just 2 years after Orwell wrote that essay, were nationalists in fighting for freedom, demanding the British surrender their freedom to Indians, but they were not hankering for power in the way in which he defines it, and they were not hostile. In fact, the day after independence, India resumed friendly relations with Britain on the grounds that, as Mahatma Gandhi said, you must hate the sin and not the sinner. So the sin was colonialism and imperialism. But once that sin was no longer being practiced, the sinner was not a sinner and you could have good relations. So our nationalism was more like what Sadiq Ali ji said, and not so much the way Orwell said. And what Sadiq Ali said today, neither unfaithful towards the nation. So nationalism should involve not being unfaithful towards your nation, nor at the same time should it be jingoism. He hit the nail on the head. Jingoism or excessive chauvinism, often as militarism, often as imposing a certain idea of the nation on others, that can be extremely, extremely dangerous. And that is precisely the challenge we have today. When our topic is what is the redefinition we're seeing of nationalism, we are seeing the kind of nationalism
that our heroic freedom fighters fought for. The nationalism of Mahatma Gandhi, of Jawaharlal Nehru, of Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, of Jayaprakash Narayan, of Dr. Ambedkar. You can look at all those giants of the 1940s and 50s and you understand their nationalism. They wanted freedom for India, but they wanted it to be an inclusive freedom where people of all backgrounds, religions, castes, creeds would all come together and serve this common nation.